What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Ancestral New Earth, a podcast committed to decolonizing consciousness and co-birthing the new earth through sacred activism. I am your host, MamaFaeria. I am a ceremonial artist, a medium, a crystal Reiki master, and an ecotherapist in training. And your girls also got a book and an album out dedicated to the divine feminine awakening, the celestial womb, and goddess of creation out on my website now. Alright guys, I am so excited to get into this topic because today we are talking about environmental racism and reclamation, how people of color can decolonize through cultivating relationship with the earth. I'm going to start this podcast with a little bit of a story so y'all can buckle in, get your popcorn, because we're going to talk about Dominican Republic, the history of colonization. We're going to talk about BIPOC redlined communities and what my mission is as a nature-based therapist, hoping to help people of color decolonizing through relationship with the earth. Let's get into it. Alright, so my story begins in the Dominican Republic. So, for those of you who don't know, I'm a first-generation Afro-Indigenous, Afro-Taína Dominican woman. And Dominican Republic was the first place that Christopher Columbus landed on in 1492. It was the first place that Christopher Columbus settled in. Dominican Republic was the first place to receive slaves through the Atlantic slave trade, African slaves, and it was the first place to undergo a mass indigenous genocide in the Americas, which isn't really a genocide. It was more of a paper genocide because the Taínos, we are still strong and alive today. So my family, specifically my dad's side of the family, was born and raised in Rachete, Puerto Plata, which is 15 minutes from where Christopher Columbus, El Pendejo, first arrived in La Isabela. I remember when I was a little kid, I would run across these fields, eating the mangoes, drinking the coconut water, eating the cacao seeds, kicking it with the chickens and the pigs and the cows and the horses, and just having a good time, honestly. And I also remember as a little kid always carrying this unexplainable grief inside of my body that had no roots and no reason. I remember feeling so connected to the land in the Dominican Republic. I remember having such a deep relationship with the earth, having such a deep relationship with the mother, and understanding inherently in my bones and in my cells that the earth feels my pain and that I feel the pain of the earth. But this doesn't really start clicking until later on in my life. So fast forward, my parents moved to Paterson, New Jersey. They leave Dominican Republic, escaping poverty, food insecurity, food desert, and political instability. And they come to the States seeking more opportunities, which is a form of displacement within itself. And so my family basically went from one unstable place to another and ended up landing in Paterson, New Jersey, a low-income BIPOC community full of systemic barriers, poverty, drug violence, gangs, crimes, and money and food insecurity. My dad got here when he was about 13, 14 years old, facing gang violence and drugs. And my mom got here when she was about 16 or 17. And she had to get her GED, drop out of high school, and basically work in a factory underage to pay for rent and to help take care of her mother and her family. Both of them were dealing with incredulous situations that I can't even imagine. And again, it is due to their hard work and sacrifice that I'm here today speaking my truth. And eventually they meet and they have me and my brother. Now, being raised in Paterson, New Jersey is a struggle within itself. And a little bit more about the history of Paterson. Paterson used to be known as the Silk City. And Paterson, aka the Silk City, was full of Jewish, and it's predominantly Jewish and Italian entrepreneurs who were trying to make it out in the world, and a lot of them ended up getting successful. And so Paterson, New Jersey was actually known as an incredibly affluent place before, and when the black and brown immigrants started moving in from Middle East, from the Caribbean, from the Latin Americas, we start to see white people leaving the space, also known as the white flight. And as they leave, so do the resources. So when the government sees that these white people are leaving Paterson, they do not distribute funds into Paterson because they don't think it's worthy. And as there are funds that are not distributed into Paterson, you see a rise in gang violence and crime and drugs. There are food insecurity, food deserts, systems are not up to date, houses are not up to date, and so people are basically living in poverty because of racism. And this is what you call a redlined community or a hood. And this is basically what environmental racism is. It's when people and bodies of color have lack of access to basic need and resources because the government refuses to distribute funds. So growing up in Paterson as an energetically sensitive child was really hard. I had little access to organic, healthy foods, clean water, clean air, or nature. I was constantly surrounded by people in fight or flight. I was constantly surrounded by people who were depressed or anxious or ill physically, emotionally, spiritually, and I had little to no examples of happy people. And so eventually I began to believe that my destiny was to be unhappy just like the people around me. On top of that, I didn't see anybody actually going for their dreams, and I thought that in my life I had to settle for less because achieving my dreams wasn't realistic. So, as much as my parents and family fought hard, and I'm so grateful for their sacrifices, due to systemic racism, colonization, and patriarchy, I wasn't set up for success. And I think for me, one of the most painful things of growing up in Paterson wasn't even the food desert or the insecurity or the constant struggle and trauma. For me, it was a lack of access to nature. And I've always had a deep relationship to nature ever since I was little. So having a deep relationship to nature while being surrounded by little to no nature, that creates and sustains a grief that I can't even begin to explain the depths of grief that creates. It's like starving while everybody around you is eating. But it's deeper and older and ancestral and rooted in a soul wound. It's like craving something you don't even remember having, but you know that it's missing. So you remember that grief that I was talking about when I was a little girl? Growing up in Paterson, that grief just became bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually I ended up developing mental illness, depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicidal ideation, and ended up having a real mental health crisis because of the lack of access to healthy foods, clean water, healthy community, and nature in my life. And along with that, lack of access to healthy embodied examples of what it actually means to be healthy, happy, and balanced as a person of color in the country, in America. And in my lowest times, nature was always my refuge. Nature taught me how to regulate my nervous system when I was surrounded by people who were dysregulated. Nature taught me about balance. Nature taught me about harmony. Nature taught me about reciprocity. And again, it was meditating in nature where my spiritual abilities were actually activated. I felt connected to my purpose, to my power, to my soul, to my gifts, and to the universal intelligence that lives within all things. And it was in nature where a lot of my deepest traumas were healed because I finally felt safe enough to let my guard down and feel my emotions. And when somebody is in fight or flight, when somebody is in constant, unstable environments, the nervous system doesn't feel safe enough to heal trauma. But of course, living in Paterson, New Jersey, this access to nature and to the healing frequencies of nature wasn't permanent. I remember being in nature and then driving back down to Paterson and just feeling this overwhelming sadness and guilt and grief take over my body again. Like I didn't want to be there. And so it was constantly a conflict because even though nature was a refuge for me, it was never permanent. And so I developed a deep anxious attachment to nature. And I was deeply disassociated and disconnected from my body because frankly, in Paterson, it didn't feel safe to be in my body. Fast forward, I arrived at Boulder, Colorado. My whole life changed. I finally had access to clean water, organic foods, nature. I didn't need a car. I didn't need to take an Uber to go to the mountains. I could have just stepped outside and looked up and be surrounded by all the trees and felt like I was home in my own skin. And when I felt home in my own skin, I was finally connected to my body enough to heal deep trauma. But even though I was surrounded by nature and healthy community and people who were happy and organic foods, I was usually the only person, one of the only people of color, and that was incredibly isolating. In Boulder and in Colorado and in predominantly white spaces, I am often tokenized, exotified, fetishized. I am often surrounded by people who are trying to erase my identity and my existence, and I'm very conscious and aware of that. And it's around this time that I realized the really hard decision that I had to make. I have to pick between nature and people of color. Because even though in the hoods I had no access to nature, at least I had access to my culture and my community. And I took it for granted then, but now being without it, I can understand the gifts and the healing of that. But when I'm surrounded by nature in the suburbs, it's usually just around white people, and the people of color are usually in the cities or in the hoods. And so I realized that white people are the most segregated people in this country. Because when you go to redline communities in cities and urban areas, usually you have the people of color from all over the world just connecting and creating community amongst each other. You got the blacks with the Latinos, you got the Latinos with the Asians, you got the Asians with all the other different types of Asians, the Indians, you got the Indians with the Middle Easterns. You got everybody just just getting down with each other. You got everybody just like connecting and talking and cultivating community. And you know, even though the communities, different communities are struggling in different ways, we all found this common ground of like we are, immigrants, or like children of immigrants in this country. And so there is that sense of belongingness there that doesn't exist in the suburbs. And when I go to the suburbs, I realize that it's mostly just white people living in a bubble, away from discomfort, away from any of the problems in this country regarding environmental racism and systemic racism in general. I'm mostly surrounded by white people who are ignorantly living in their bliss and don't feel like they have a responsibility in this country to make it a better place. And so that grief that I was talking about earlier continues to live in my body, and I continue to develop a fluid relationship with this grief. And the more that I tend to this grief and the more that I tend to the earth, the more that I realize that the earth feels my pain and I'm actually feeling the pain of the earth. So a couple of years ago, I was bleeding in Dominican Republic, and I had this incredible experience. And this was actually the start of me understanding how important it is for people of color, specifically African indigenous people, to heal with the earth. So I was in Dominican Republic and I was feeling ostracized and rejected from by my community. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And I was bleeding and I gave my blood to the earth and I started crying and crying. It was like as I was giving blood to the earth, there was the grief that I've been feeling all of my life that's just been intangible, with no root, with no explanation, was getting louder and louder. And as I was giving my blood to the earth, I hit this point in my body, in my emotional body, where everything was released, and I was crying with the earth, and I was crying with the earth. And it was in that moment where I felt and I knew that the earth was feeling exactly what I was feeling. And as I was crying, the earth was showing me a whole bunch of visions. She showed me the visions of the Taino genocides on that land that I was crying. She showed me the visions of the enslavement and the torture of my African ancestors. And then she showed me the vision of how the Africans were displaced from their from their land, from their culture, from their languages, from their spirituality. She showed me visions of my Taino ancestors being ripped away from their cultures and practices and getting killed and being endangered and until eventually becoming almost extinct. And as I was grieving and crying and releasing all this, the earth showed me that the grief that I was holding in my body the entire time was actually the grief of my ancestors. It was older than me. It wasn't even mine. And then I was crying, I was seeing the visions of my childhood, the times where I wanted connection to people, to community, and I didn't have access to it. The times that I wanted connection to the earth, to healing, to harmony, but because of environmental racism, I didn't have access to it. In that moment, I realized that the deepest root of my pain is ancestral healing, and that the current systems of racism and colonization are actually in place to not only perpetuate the trauma that lives, the colonial trauma that lives in people of color's body, but it was actually created to sustain the trauma. And so me and my community, specifically Dominican, Latin, Black, and Indigenous people, we are in a state of CPTSD. We have experienced intense trauma, intense soul wound, disconnection from our sense of belongingness in the cosmos due to colonization. We haven't had time to grieve it. We haven't had time to heal it. And now we live in systems that continue to create the same feeling of fight or flight that our ancestors were in during the genocide and Atlantic slave trades. And as I was crying and speaking to the earth, and the earth is speaking to me, she gave me a gift and she gave me a medicine. And that is when she said, we're supposed to grieve our pain with the earth. One of the cruelest things that colonization ever did to our people was to disconnect us from the mother, disconnect us from the earth, because for thousands of years, my African indigenous ancestors lived in harmony with the earth. They lived in harmony with the mother and with her cycles and with the ecosystem. And because they lived in harmony with nature, they understood their place and their importance in the grand scheme of creation. When we lived in harmony with nature, we understood our purpose in creation and in life itself. Living with nature gives us a sense of self. Living with nature gives us a sense of belonging. Listening to her, tending to her, having a relationship with her, and seeing the earth as not an object to be dominated, which is what colonization and patriarchy instilled within us, but seeing the earth as our mother. And because she is our mother, because she nurtures us and takes care of us, we have a responsibility on this planet to take care of her back, to steward her, to protect her, to listen to her, and to be in right relationship with her so that the entire world can live in harmony. And so my ancestors knew that they had a divine contract, a divine soul contract, a divine responsibility on this earth as stewards and protectors and wisdom keepers of the earth, to make sure that there is harmony and that harmony continues to permeate across all living things and traditions and cultures and ecosystems. And when colonization happened through patriarchy, this is what it destroyed. Colonization destroyed our connection to the land, our connection to our spirituality, and therefore it destroyed our connection and our relationship with ourself and with the divine. Because my ancestors knew that through the earth we found connection to the divine, to God, and through the earth we find connection to ourselves and each other. Nature is not a supplement. Nature is a basic need. Just like water and food and friends and community and family, nature is necessary for not only the survival but the thriving of our species as a humanity. And I'm not just talking about drinking the water and eating the food. I'm talking about spiritual, emotional, intimate relationship with the mother, with the earth as mother and mother as source. And when we do not have that relationship, we do not know who we are as a people. There is an amnesia that happens, a cultural amnesia. And then in my people, in my Dominican Latin community, there is an amnesia of who we are and of where we came from and of the excellence and the harmony and the brilliance and the resilience and the joy and the creativity that we came from and that in which we inherently are even to this day. And part of healing with the earth, part of connecting with the earth for me is healing that amnesia and restoring these ancient codes, these ancestral memories inside of my body so that I can understand my own personal power, my own personal gifts, and I can understand the reason that I am on this planet to serve not only humans but the animals and the plant kingdom and the mineral kingdom, and not only the earth but the every single planet in this galaxy, and every single galaxy in this universe, and every single universe in this multiverse, because my ancestors understood through the earth that we are not separate beings. We are interconnected. We are connected to all things. New age spirituality pedestalizes hyper-independency, but ancestral earth-based rooted spirituality understands that healing must happen through collective effort, collective liberation, individual and collective liberation through understanding that we are all connected. Because harm that happens in relationships must be healed in relationship. My ancestors understood that because we are inherently connected to the trees and the land and the waters, that we cannot harm these beings without harming ourselves. And now, as we live in a capitalistic, colonial, patriarchal society, indoctrinated with so much illusion of separation that has been passed down by the broken white man, we no longer live these ways. And so we harm others, not knowing that we are actually harming ourselves. And this is creating a great karma across the earth, upon the earth, that is eventually destroying not only the earth, not only the animal kingdom, plant kingdom, but eventually it will lead to the extinction of the human species. And this is all because of colonization and patriarchy. The entire reason why there is a global climate crisis is because of colonization and patriarchy. Because colonization attacked the original stewards, wisdom keepers, and protectors of the earth. My ancestors, who have been stewarding and listening to the songs of the earth and singing her songs and dancing and writing her stories. We had an intimate relationship with her. We knew exactly how to keep harmony within ourselves, our communities, and each other. And that does not mean that there was no conflict or war. Conflict and war is a part of harmony as well. It's about understanding what these conflicts are teaching us, what these wars, what these pains are teaching us so we can grow from it. It's about going through the darkness and growing and healing from it. And we have forgotten that wisdom as a nation because of colonization. And so for me, whenever I connect with the earth now, it's like I'm immediately connected not only to my personal power, but to my ancestral power and to my purpose on this planet. When I connect with the earth, I see how the same way that colonization extracted minerals and oils from Africa, the same way that colonization ripped the roots and the minerals from Haiti's land, the same way that colonization has created the bleaching of coral reefs all over the ocean and the hole in the ozone layer. That is the same way that colonization and patriarchy has harmed and is harming people of color and bodies of culture. People of color in America and in this world, and specifically African and indigenous people of color, are treated like landfills. The white man, the white toxic masculinity, projects all of their unconscious pain and darkness onto us, and we are the ones that have to deal with it. AKA environmental racism in the hoods. White people live in ignorant bliss bubbles in the suburbs, eating organic food and cleaning and drinking their clean water, using all the best technology of the world, while it is usually people of color in this country and in this world that are left to deal with the consequences of that. When people say that one day we will not have birds in the sky, one day we will not have trees, one day we will not have mountains, that is not one day. That is already happening to people of color in this country. And it is now when white people in the suburbs are waking up to that. Because now it is beginning to affect them. We all need to have relationship with each other in order to heal this. We all specifically need to have relationship with the earth in order to heal this. Because when I connect with the earth, I know that she feels my pain. When I connect with the earth, and specifically when I go back to Paterson, New Jersey when I was born, and I see the wilting dandelions next to my house trying to survive, and I see the half-broken tree a block away from where my neighbor lives trying to sing its song again, and when I see the couple of birds in the sky trying to find ground anywhere that's not a building, I feel the grief of the land in Paterson, New Jersey, and I know that the same grief that the earth is in is the same grief that the people in. The earth feels discarded and the earth feels forgotten, just how the people of color in Paterson and in these other communities feel forgotten and discarded. There's oils and chemicals in the water, just like there's oils and chemicals in the people's lungs and in their blood. The people of color and the bodies of culture in these communities carry the same pain that the earth feels in that specific place. And so when we connect with the earth, we must understand that the earth is actually asking us to heal racism. The earth is asking us to go back to the roots of colonization and patriarchy, heal our ancestral trauma, and understand what it is that we need to do so that we can restore a right relationship with the earth. And in order for this to happen, people of color need to lead the movement. Because even though people of color have been colonized, are the most colonized people in this world, specifically African indigenous people of color, we are also newly colonized. We have only been colonized 500 years ago. White people were colonized thousands of years ago by their own people. And so that means that people of color, specifically African indigenous people of color, we still carry the technology inside of our cells, inside of our bones, inside of our bodies that the world needs to reach a state of collective liberation, harmony, and peace. And so I want to say this to all the people of color listening right now. Connect with the earth. Go to the mountains. Talk to a tree. Go to your ancestral homelands if you can, if you have access to it. Because I know not everybody has access to it. And listen to your ancestors that speak through the flowers and the winds and the waters. Because the ancestors, as specifically in my country, when my Black and indigenous ancestors died on the lands of Quisqueya, and their blood and their bones wilted into the soil, they became a part of the earth. And now whenever I hear the earth, I hear my ancestors and I hear their cries, I hear their grief and I hear their pain, and I also hear their promises. And the ancestors in the earth, they are waiting for us to remember who we are. People of color, the ancestors in the earth are waiting for us to remember who we are so we can step into our power, reclaim our medicine, and heal the world. Because no white man is going to save us from his own catastrophe. They cannot save themselves. They are lost and they need guidance. And we are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the ones that have the most access to these ancestral memories. Because again, we have only been colonized 500 years ago. They were colonized thousands of years ago. We are closer to the source. And this is not coming from a narcissistic, arrogant perspective. It's coming from a space of stewardship, of humble responsibility. Understanding that yes, we are experiencing systems of oppression that harm us every single day while we haven't healed our past trauma yet. And at the same time, we have the wisdom and the strength and the power of our ancestors inside of us through the earth. And when we listen to the earth and our ancestors, the earth, I promise you, the earth will give you specific instructions so that you can move forward with your purpose, with your mission on this planet, and help decolonize systems of oppression and build and birth the new earth. This is the reason why I want to be a nature-based therapist. I want to help people of color, specifically Latin, African, and indigenous people of color, understand their inherent belongingness in creation in the cosmos. I want to help people of color heal the wounds of colonization that disconnected us from the earth. And as we were disconnected from the earth, we were disconnected from the divine, from God. I want to help through nature-based therapy, through spiritual therapy, people of color reclaim their ancestral gifts and heal the cultural amnesia that was placed upon us. I want us to remember our excellence, and I want us to remember our wholeness, because our wholeness can never be taken away, and the wisdom can never be lost and can only be forgotten. And with the help of the earth, we have what it takes to remember who we are. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. I hope you got some goosebumps when I was talking, when I was channeling the divine. Thank you so much for being here. If you want more access to my work, go to my website, MamaFaeriaHealingArts.com, where you can see my book, my album, my YouTube videos, and anything else that I'm up to these days. Thanks for listening, y'all. May the Divine Mother be with you. Ashe.